overthrowing Netanyahu is going to be impossible if the Palestinian public doesn't go out and vote.
And I think that in many ways, the Palestinian citizens understand Israeli society sometimes more than Jewish citizens understand Israeli society.
Absolutely. Are you kidding me? Hey everyone, I'm Abed.
And I'm Jess.
And this is The Long Answer,
a deep dive into the hardest questions around Israel-Palestine. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome back.
I need to get my inner... I'm so tired.
Why are you tired, Sally?
It's been a week since I came back from... A little bit over a week. Wow, I can't believe it. From the US, from our tour. And then we had the 10-year anniversary of standing together, which was a long weekend. And a jet-lagged baby, and then a congested baby, and just baby. Baby is the key word.
Baby and occupation.
All right, we got this.
We're ready.
Important topic today.
Today we're going to speak about Palestinian citizens of Israel, which is a topic that we get a lot of questions about. A lot of people not really understanding like who we're talking about, what we're talking about, a lot of different terms that are used to describe sort of the same group of people.
It's something that is not often discussed. It's almost like a blind spot in the international, discourse. So yeah, we felt like it's important to talk about it.
And to put really simply, after the Nakba in 1948, around 150,000 Palestinians remained in their homeland and were granted Israeli citizenship. Now, until 1966, Palestinian citizens lived under Israeli military rule, so martial law. And today, Palestinian citizens make up around 21.5% of Israeli citizens. 82% are Muslim, 9% are Druze, and 9% are Christian. Many people identify with different parts of this identity. Some people identify as Palestinian, some people identify as Arab, some people identify as Israeli. Something that I wanted to make clear at the beginning of this episode is that, by law, based on the fact that we all have citizenship, Palestinian citizens are technically citizens just like Jewish citizens with voting rights and civil rights. But in practice, this obviously looks very different. And a lot of people would say that Palestinian citizens are essentially second-class citizens. A lot of the laws don't apply in the same way to Palestinian citizens. And this can be seen like in the most simple terms by things like the nation-state law, which is a basic law that was passed that constitutionally defines Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people. It says that, the right of self-determination is unique to Jews. Hebrew is the sole official language. And the national holidays are Jewish holidays, and the national symbols are Jewish symbols. And that's like the context with which like we're working, and that's what we're talking within, is this sort of like on paper rights, but in practice discrimination and oppression.
I mean, I wouldn't say technically we are the same, exactly because of what you said. Technically, we are actually not the same. But I want to say that when people talk about, the daily realities of Palestinians in Gaza or in the West Bank, it's also very intricate. The reason that we are diving into the reality of Palestinians in Israel is not because it's more important, just because it is less talked about, and also because it just pertains, relevance to our mission. And obviously, we always talk about how important it is to mobilize Palestinians in Israel towards building the new majority for peace, equality, and social justice. And because I am also a Palestinian citizen of Israel.
I wanted to ask you, Sally, next year there are national elections in Israel. As a Palestinian citizen of Israel, what are you thinking about as you head into next year? What do you think Palestinian citizens in Israel are thinking about in general with regards to the election and the changes coming up in the next year?
Palestinians today are paralyzed politically. For people who don't know, the Israeli parliament system is not like a two-party system. It's actually a multi-party system. While the main ideas don't really innovate, there's not a lot of competitive ideas, as we discussed before in recent episodes. They do create new parties, and some fall and don't pass the threshold, and then you have other parties, and then they merge, and then they create new agendas and new faces and new leaderships.
And I guess to make that clear, what we're talking about is that it's a representative like form of voting. So basically each party has to receive a certain amount of votes, and they have to get at least 4 mandates in order to be included in the Knesset. So not in the coalition, but in order just to pass and be members of the parliament, members of the Knesset. Then what needs to happen once people have been elected into the Knesset, a coalition needs to be formed, and the coalition needs to have a majority.
A 61 seat, yeah, at least.
And so when we talk about Israeli elections, we're talking about really like a combination of a lot of parties, very different to a lot of countries around the world, and people having, I guess, a lot of choice when it comes to the parties, but also it being very difficult to form a coalition between the parties, and that being dependent on a lot of factors.
Of moving parts, but also not really, right? Because, the voting is sociological. It is almost tribal. But for Palestinians, there hasn't been a new party since 98. That's almost 30 years. And almost no new political faces, political leadership. It's the same leadership, older men, some of whom we love, I'm going to be honest, and appreciate, and they have done an amazing job, in many instances, and failed in many instances, like most leaders. But we haven't renovated. We have a very deep, according to polls today, there are really very, very little to no trust or faith in their ability to actually create any kind of change within our reality, and definitely not when it comes to the occupation. There is really this perceived sense of hopelessness within the Palestinian public in Israel. The other thing that it's important to understand is that Palestinians, since the establishment of the State of Israel, have never been part of the coalition, part of any ministries or any professional law-making offices within the government, and they have always were part of the parliament, which is always in the opposition. The only exception was in 2021, Mansour Abbas, who was part of the government for a very, very short time. So it's important to understand that we were never granted as a collective the legitimacy to be to be a partner, to be a leading partner of any government. There has been some instances of kind of endorsements that allowed, for example, Yitzhak Rabin to be elected back in the 90s. We need to understand that today, the Palestinian public doesn't have any hand that is telling them, okay, you are a partner. Even if you look at, opposition leader, Yair Lapid, I actually saw an interview with him, I think last week, talking if you would be able to form a government, would you invite Palestinian, the Arab parties to join you? And he's like, no, I think that is premature. And I'm like, and that's even for the foreign media, it's just they don't even get to entertain the idea of the fact that Palestinians are not only 20% of the population, they are partners in so many different agendas and goals, but also critical. Overthrowing Netanyahu is going to be impossible if the Palestinian public doesn't go out and vote and actually reach what has been reached only twice in the history of Israel, which is over 60% turnout for Palestinians.
I think talking about the voter turnout, something that's particularly interesting. If you look at just the general voter turnout, including everyone, it kind of doesn't change that much. It goes from 67% to 73%. And if you look at amongst Palestinian citizens, there's a lot more of a range. There are years, for example, 2021, where the voter turnout for Palestinians fell to 44.6%. But then if you look at 2020, it peaked at 64.8%. And so it's while the general public, we don't see that much movement, we do see a lot of movement in terms of Palestinian citizens, and it shapes how the elections look in quite big ways. Because if Palestinian voter turnout is really high and there are more mandates given to Arab parties, it really does put pressure on the rest of the parties who are trying to form a coalition to consider forming a coalition with Arab parties, which is something that, besides for 2021, we haven't necessarily seen.
The whole discussion of our representation in the parliament is either discussed through the lens of instrumental partnership by the liberal, Zionist left, which is, oh, you need to be together and you need to save us. Why are the Arabs not voting? You need to go. I'm like, did you talk to them? Did you tell them they're a partner? Did you give them any,
reason
to vote for you or to vote at all, to be, participatory, in this, in your system, in your democracy? It drives me crazy. There's always this why are you not, And then, they remember a couple months frantically before the elections, oh, we need to get the Arabs to go out and vote. How are we going to do that? And then they come and ask us and we're like, where have you been? Or
it's not followed up with any demand of the parties that they're voting for to make a coalition with Arab parties.
Of course.
We need you to vote just to
No, it's not that
make
it's not
it
demanded. It's actually explicitly said that we will not sit with Arabs.
Yeah.
Even, the opposition today, the head of opposition is saying we will not create a government with Arabs.
Given all of that, what do you, obviously Palestinians in Israel, Palestinians everywhere are not a monolith, but what would you say are the biggest priorities when thinking about voting, when thinking about political structures? What are Palestinians in Israel voting on? What are they thinking about the most?
I mean, according to, I will go with the simple, what the polls say is important for Palestinians. And then I will go into the diversity, right? So the polls today say that almost half of the Palestinian public that was polled believe that the number one thing that is most urgent is the organized crime and the violence in our cities and in our towns. And we can talk about this in a little bit, what it means. What do you think is the second thing?
Somewhere between cost of living and poverty and the occupation.
Yeah, poverty and housing. And just living, literally existing. And we can talk about this as well. And then the third thing is actually the question of Palestine and the occupation and these pollings are actually from the last 2 years. It's during the genocide that we're polling at 50%. Before October 7th, we were polling at over 80% of people saying that organized crime is the most urgent thing. Today, the average Palestinian in Israel lives in a city, in Al-Fahim, Nazareth, Sakhnin. I mean, they are officially cities, but they are not planned. They are just a big, magnified, inflated village that is messy, is not funded well, and that is just, you could literally get a bullet by walking in the streets of Al-Fahim or Kufr Yasif. Just 3 days ago, a 15-year-old got shot dead going to the store, right next to his house.
Can you explain what you're talking about?
Yes, of course. So organized crime and violence in Palestinian society in Israel is actually an epidemic, something that I would say is yet another form of oppression. We are talking about the fact that within the year that this new government has been elected, from 2022 to 2023, the number has more than doubled in murders. And who's the head of the organized crimes? Big mafias, I would say. And we need to understand that, Israel today, what is the definition of a state? It's, having sovereignty over violence. And we understand that the state of Israel kind of relinquished its responsibility to have any kind of sovereignty over violence within the Palestinian society in Israel. And it's a tool. It's really is a tool of, you might say, settler colonialism even. It's something, it's not unique to Israel, and it's definitely not unique to Palestinian society as a radicalized, minority that suffers from this. And murders and homicide are not the whole picture. We are really talking about blackmailing. We are talking about protection, right? So you have to pay money to get protection. And if you don't pay the money, you get exactly the opposite of that. And we're talking about teachers being blackmailed and having to pay protection, not even just businesses. We're talking about complete paralyzed economies within our Palestinian cities and towns. We're talking about complete chaos when it comes to arms. Many, 16, 15-year-olds who have guns who are paid, 500 shekels to go and just shoot a store. We are talking about very, very clear traces of who did the crimes, who are absolutely not being, charged, who are not being arrested, not being investigated. How much do you think out of the almost 200 homicides since the beginning of the year, how much do you think has been, the numbers of not even convictions, arrests of the homicides? Give me a number.
Just arrests, not even
just
convictions.
Arrests of over almost 200 homicides.
Let's say like arrests, let's say like 15%.
15? Okay, 10% arrests. So zero convictions. Zero convictions. Zero. It's insane. So we are talking about really a paralyzed society. So it's no wonder that that's what the Palestinians are voting for. That's what Palestinians want to tackle.
What would you say to someone that says like, okay, yeah, that sounds terrible. Sounds like a horrible thing that Palestinians in Israel are facing, but it's their issue. It's a Palestinian issue, or it's an Arabs in Israel issue. What do you say to that?
Or worse, it's cultural.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people kind of allude to that when they say that. They think, well, they're just like that.
Yeah.
What do you say?
I mean, about the cultural, there's not much to say other than to talk about the fact that before 2000, there was an average of 4 homicides related to crime within Palestinian society, and that in the West Bank and Gaza, that number is much, much, much less, than the Palestinians in Israel. So you can see that it's engineered, even though it's very upsetting to have to explain why we are not culturally violent. The other thing I would say is that we need to understand this violence and crime in the context of systemic oppression of Palestinians, in Israel-Palestine. And if you are really talking about Palestinian freedom, this is exactly what we're talking about organized crime and violence in Palestinian cities in Israel. This is part of it, and it is such an essential part of it, because we're talking about doctors and sons of doctors who are being killed. And, we're not talking about, when I say doctors, I don't mean that doctors mean more than any others. It just means that it's not just about the very marginalized parts of Palestinian society. We're talking about everyone being impacted by this in Israel. And it has also started to impact Jewish communities, by the way, in mixed cities. I see that in Haifa. We see that here in Tel Aviv, Yafa. We see that in Akka, in Ramle, in Lud. It really is impacting Jewish communities. We need to understand it, and we need to understand what's feeding it as well. And what's feeding it is obviously the system. It's engineered that way. It's also poverty, unemployment. Here's another crazy statistic. I think there's so many just unbelievable statistics about our society. 1 out of 3 young people from the age of 16 until 34 in Palestinian society in Israel, 1 out of 3 are خسر مآس, unoccupied. Unoccupied, like they are unemployed. They don't have any welfare framework. They don't have any job, any school, any extracurricular, any community, anything. They have nothing. They literally are just like in a social economic vacuum of the abyss. Like they don't have any kind of a way to understand how they will navigate life. Like they are unemployed, they are uneducated. 1 out of 3. To understand, no, I really like, sometimes I try to like sink that in. And like, of course, there's, of course, these organized families are going to come and give you 500 shekels and a pistol and you're going to go and shoot. Of course, like, what do you mean? And we need to understand these things. And we need to understand that the systemic oppressions and the deterioration of communities is just feeding into this so much. And we really see it. It's just like it's a monster that's just feeding on this war, that is feeding on everything that's happening and all the budget cuts that are happening and the years of discrimination.
In the education I got about Israel, we were often shown examples of Palestinian citizens who were referred to as Arab Israelis in this kind of education, who were doctors and lawyers and teachers and nurses and had all these amazing professions and amazing opportunities and worked in high tech and all this stuff as some sort of proof of Israel being a good place for Arabs, or Israel really valuing Palestinian citizens or Arab citizens. What do you think about that?
I think Palestinians in Israel are lawyers and in high tech and doctors and successful and educated and prospering in many areas despite the state of Israel. Despite. I mean, you have to look at Gaza. You have to look. It's incredible. Despite the economy of the blockade and the economy of, again and again and again war, prior to October 7th. And, to see the amount of people, of women educated, in universities lecturing, of students, even though they know they might not find employment, the amount of innovation. I mean, do we need to say it?
I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
Something that someone once told me, like I was having a conversation with someone about other, conflicts or systems of oppression that have ended, and then how you sort of create like a new equal society. And someone said that what's actually particularly interesting about Palestinian society is that despite so much oppression and despite so much kind of inequality and lack of access to really high levels of education, Palestinian society has created that for itself. And there are so many Palestinians that are ready, basically, to create a state and ready to hold these massive positions of power despite the oppression. And I think that's such a unique and incredible thing about Palestinian society.
Right, absolutely. And it's about like professional success and educational success and economic success, but it's also, a lot of people are like, oh, like you're gonna be stoned if you're in Gaza, wearing what you wear, they talk to me like that and stuff. And I'm like, first of all, obviously that's a very, very problematic stance for you to impose, any kind of your own ideas of what liberalism is and what, to conservative society. But we, as a Palestinian, I do need to say, we do have problems. I want to take responsibility over that. We are a deeply homophobic society. We are quite oppressive to women and to young people. There are many, many challenges that I face navigating my own society as a young woman. I think those things are healthy to discuss and to raise and to talk about. But obviously they can never be part of any outside criticism, in the context of what Israel did to Palestinians. But it's important to mention that, of course.
And it makes it very hard to actually talk about and tackle those issues when every time you mention them, it's sort of used as a Hasbara talking point of like, well, we have to do what we're doing in Gaza and the West Bank because of what Palestinians do to gay people. Like, well, then you can't actually have internal discussions about LGBTQ rights within Palestinian society if it's constantly just like grabbed by Hasbara and grabbed by the Israeli narrative of like, well, we're better or we do that better. There is no gay marriage in Israel. There's no LGBTQ equality in Israel. Gay couples can't adopt children the ways that straight couples can. And so this idea that Israel is this like safe haven for women and gay people and Palestinians are 1,000 years behind is insane at the same time.
Absolutely. I am immensely proud of our people. And honestly, there are many internal challenges in that sense that we are holding as well, and we need to keep holding while trying to mobilize Palestinians. It's not just in the context of the occupation and oppression, it's also in the internal context of our own conflicts and development as peoples under oppression. What does that mean? You still hold a responsibility of what does that make of you. And at the end of the day, the kind of resistance against the oppression that you do, that you portray, that you present is also has to depict the kind of society you want to be beyond oppression, with freedom and independence and sovereignty and equality.
Sally, we were talking about, how there's sort of three main priorities for Palestinian citizens. And those are the crime and violence and tackling that issue, cost of living and socioeconomic issues. And then the issue of how you called it, the Palestinian question or statehood or independence or what that means. What do you think Palestinians in Israel are thinking about? How would you describe the past 2 years from the perspective of a Palestinian in Israel?
Not just the past 2 years, by the way.
Yeah.
So according to a poll by Tel Aviv University, a survey in 2024 to the Arab Palestinian citizens, while almost 49% of Palestinians in Israel do believe that the most realistic solution is a two-state solution based on 67 borders. Almost 62% believe that this reconciliation and this solution is not on the horizon. And I think this is very important to understand.
Specifically, not even just that reconciliation or that solution, that any solution.
Any solution.
And that's what keeps coming up, that no matter what percentage of people support any solution, a higher percentage of people don't think that any solution is possible.
Right. We spoke a lot in recent episodes about the lack of option for the Israeli public, right? For the Palestinian public, it's like the other side of the cone. There is a political will, but there's still no hope. There's no viable option because there's no viable leadership that is powerful enough to create any kind of impact from both sides, right? It just feels hopeless. It literally feels hopeless. And I think it's important to understand that context of what we perceive is possible versus what we actually want.
And with that in mind, I think a lot of the polls that we were looking at and a lot of the surveys that we were looking at about this issue keep asking people what they think is realistic. And
Exactly.
I think that's part of the problem, that instead of saying, what do you want? What do you imagine? What would you like your future to look like? All of these polls on Jewish Israelis and Palestinian citizens are about what you think is realistic. And so obviously no one thinks anything is realistic because they haven't seen any sort of political alternative.
So let's see what we actually want. And I will talk maybe from my own point of view. We want equality. I think in many ways we want to see our people equal and free. We don't want to witness the atrocities and the oppression and the violence again and again and again. The occupation, the intifadas in the 80s and in 2000, it impacted us here. We had our own eruptions, our own uprisings within Israel, and people, in October 2000, people were killed, Israeli citizens, Palestinians who were Israeli citizens who were killed when we had the uprising and the protests here within our cities. We're not detached from the military occupation. We just experience it very differently. And the reason why I'm saying this is because while it feels for many Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza like this is a foreign occupation that really they have not feels. They experience it as something that they don't have the right to protest, right? There's no law in the West Bank that allows a Palestinian to protest, right? We do have that. We have the right to protest. We have the right to elect.
What does it mean to have
engage.
the right to protest if Palestinians are always arrested for protesting?
Right. What it means that we are still able to do it, that we're still able to mobilize the masses at a great cost, but we're still able to do it. It's always, relative. We were able to mobilize people. We were able, and the question is also, how do you mobilize people? around what do you mobilize people? For us, I think as a movement as well, and for me as, a community organizer, a Palestinian, activist, I need to ask myself, what does it mean to mobilize people around Palestinian freedom and around equality? At the end of the day, one of the most important things that we need to do in order to mobilize is create a space, a safe space for political imagination of what we actually want and of our pain. Because these spaces don't exist. Of our grief and pain and fear for many of the bereaved families of the organized crime here in Israel. To have a space for them to grieve, to be angry, to talk, to plan, to have Jewish solidarity, to have Jewish partnership in this, because we do feel abandoned, and then create safe spaces for them to be active, to actually advance things. And that does require a lot of Jewish presence and a lot of Jewish protection. If we have protective presence in the West Bank, it looks different here. It looks in a ways that, we are able to organize and express our stances and go to protests in Al-Fahim and have Jewish people in the front, because you have the police, but then you know that these Jewish people are able to actually create some kind of protective layer, or take some of the heat, the violent heat.
Something that is maybe also not clear to people is that for the majority of Jewish Israelis, the term Palestinian refers to people in the West Bank, Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. And a lot of Jewish Israelis don't understand. If you talk about Palestinians in Israel, there's well, what do you mean Palestinians in Israel? They're Arabs, or they're Arab Israelis, or they're Arab citizens. And I think that the identifying Arabs in Israel as Palestinians is both new to Jewish Israelis, and also, a lot of Palestinians...
It's new to Arabs,
right,
to be referred to as Palestinians.
I feel like I've heard so many times people being like, when I started organizing with the movement, it was my first time that I was able to be Palestinian,
and to be referred to as Palestinian,
right? And it can be have
unnerving.
A job as a Palestinian.
It can be unnerving. It can be very scary to people to be referred to as Palestinian. Actually, I have a story about this. 3 days ago, I was at we have a municipal committee for welfare that I'm part of, and there are cuts, of course, budget cuts everywhere around. And what's the first thing they're going to close? A Palestinian women welfare center for basically Palestinian young youth, women youth who are abused, sexual assault survivors, and all of these things. And I have a part of our movement who is a social worker who's also part of this committee. And we were going in, with a strategy, talking to all the social workers into the place and everything. And then the social worker, who's an activist with us, who's a Jewish, actually a Mizrahi, a Moroccan Jew. And she starts talking about the Palestinian girls, la, 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 and the Palestinian. And everyone around in the committee was looking at her are we talking about the same committee? They were genuinely confused about which center we're talking about, because they were sure she's talking about some NGO that works with, West Bank girls who come here for asylum or something. And they weren't sure, and it was funny afterwards. And then I talked to her and I was like, maybe we shouldn't, just for the sake of clarity and for the sake of being, conducive and practical, let's say Arab girls in Haifa. But on the bigger picture, I think it's important to introduce that to the Israeli public. I think it's important to give Palestinians the chance to say they are Palestinian. And I'm not saying that lightly. I think for my husband, for example, it would be very unnerving to identify as Palestinian in the hospital. It's actually extremely political.
Yeah.
He's not a doctor. He's medical imaging, but yeah, he works at the hospital. He's a medical staff, and it's very unnerving for him to say that, he's a Palestinian. And I would never, and I think the fact that I say that I'm Palestinian and his colleagues actually follow me, actually creates a lot of tension for him at work, which is insane. Yeah. So we need to also understand that. How do we that's the safe space that I'm talking about. It's not just about imposing identity or giving space. It's also the fact that it can really actually have, consequences. So the question is, how important is it for you to make sure that you're a Palestinian? No, but it's okay. I want to be an Arab. No, but you're a Palestinian. Like, yes, but in your context, in your work, within what you do, it's just more effective to say that you're an Arab, and that's okay. That's okay.
So what do you think it means when we refer to most people as Palestinian citizens? What do you think it says about people? Like, do you feel like it's excluding people that don't necessarily identify in that way? Do you feel like...
No, I don't think so. I mean, some people might actually be taken aback from this. We actually deal with that within our Palestinian seminar. It is called Palestinian Leadership Seminar. And then we have people that come, Palestinian students who don't feel comfortable identifying as Palestinian. And I understand it. I mean, of course I understand it. I see the fear, the conditioning, the silencing with my husband, with my parents, like growing up with my grandparents, I see it with young people today on campuses. Like we see it. I don't think saying Palestinian is something that, gatekeeps or that limits or that, inhibits Palestinians who don't identify, who don't feel comfortable doing it, to go into and be with us. So that's what's important, right? And we're not gonna, impose or condition Palestinians to identify as such. And it is, it's funny, what is Palestinian, right? I mean, most people in Israel who are Palestinian have relatives in the West Bank and in Gaza and, abroad, refugees, diaspora, and they are definitely Palestinian, right? So I think it's just, this kind of identity politics is not something that we go into too much. And, the reason why we do use it is also to politicize and to humanize and to create space for what Palestinian is within the Israeli society. I do want to go back to like what statehood means in that sense. I mean, we talked about, I don't think there's comparative statistics. If there are, please send it to us. I couldn't find it, about the difference between Palestinians in Israel and in Gaza or in the West Bank, about, 2 states, 1 state, all of these things. But I do think it's quite similar, the kind of trends that we go, because we are a collective. I mean, we are experiencing, again, the same things in very different forms. We are a collective. And I do think that, when people talk about 2 states, we are a little bit forgotten. What does it mean? So we are under a Jewish state? How does that solve our problem of freedom and equality, right? What kind of state is the Israeli state? If we are going to establish a Palestinian state for the Palestinian people, what does it mean? What does Israel look like? Is it the state for the Jewish people? Are we still going to be a Class B citizens? And I think I'm going to just look at it in the most practical sense of what does it mean to be Palestinian in a state that is equal, right? In my own homeland. I'm not, people are like, oh, are you going to move to, I literally get asked, are you going to move to the West Bank once there's a, I'm like, no, Ma'alia and Haifa, they are my homeland. I mean,
And I want to say as well that, from the education that I was raised on, I was often told, like, yeah, but, like, Arabs in Israel would always stay in Israel. Like, they don't want to move to the West Bank or Gaza. They don't want to be under Palestinian leadership. And it's like, it was never a conversation about
the fact that it is literally my home.
Yeah, maybe Palestinians don't want to move or think about their life based on what authority they're under and actually where they consider to be their home. Like, I think that's what you're getting at, is like, well, I don't want to move because I'm from this place.
So I want a police that serves me, that serves my security, that solves crime. I want a state that serves my interests, my welfare, my education, that respects my language and my culture and my deep-rooted heritage on this land. I want a state that builds new towns for Palestinians. That's another thing, for us as Palestinians, people don't understand. other than the fact that there has been 0 Palestinian towns built since the establishment of the State of Israel within Israel, even though we grew dramatically. Our villages and towns are exploding, and they're not giving us more land. We're actually very similar to the West Bank. We are actually being surrounded by Jewish settlements, confiscated through various levels and campaigns. And now in the Negev, there's constant confiscation of, the 34 unrecognized villages and ethnic cleansing and really just uprooting whole communities. The ethnic cleansing is ongoing within Palestinians in Israel. So I want a state that builds me, new towns. I want a state that doesn't bombard every border that was opened for us for generations. I want Shams, my daughter, to party, have a weekend in Beirut and have colleagues, peers from Amman and from Baghdad and from Halab, Aleppo, that study here. And I want a state that encourages that encourage my culture and my heritage and see it not only as equal, but as part of the continuity of who we are and how we are. I don't, that kind of state is not something that it matters to me, if it's 2 state or 1 state, that state needs to do that for everyone from the river to the sea. And of course, I understand that I am a national minority here, but you can be equal as a national minority. You can be. And, you can be celebrated and you can be cherished and you can be prosperous as a national minority. In my own homeland, I have in Brooklyn, just 2 weeks ago, was it? The last day, I met a Palestinian guy, 27-year-old from Gaza. His name is Hussein. He actually left, I think, a couple of weeks before October 7th. And he lost a lot. I'm not even going to name. He lost a lot. He talked to me about statehood and what it means to me. And he told me, I don't understand the discussion. He's like, I don't understand why they're so, persistent on 1 state. What does it matter? What does it matter? I want to live in Tel Aviv. I want to work in Tel Aviv. Are you going to prevent? And he was getting really mad. He's like, I want to live in Tel Aviv. That's awesome. That sounds awesome. He's like, I want to go and then visit my family in Beit Lahia. What's the problem? If I have the freedom of movement, if we're all fine and equal and working and what is the problem? Why do I need to get a 1 state, and I obviously think that, I'm not trying to make him a normalizer or, trying to justify an Israeli state. It's just interesting to see, at the end of the day, statehood, it's kind of a very technical solution. And at the end of the day, I think our vision and what we want and what we want to reach to is not dependent on what is possible or realistic or 1 state or 2 state, but actually how do we want to experience our homeland? That should be our matzpen.
Compass.
That should be our compass. How do people want to experience their homeland? Just enjoy the Middle East and the openness of it and the deep beauty of this region and how we can see it. And at the end of the day, that's what we need to hold. And it doesn't dismiss the technicality and the urgency of things, of statehood and solutions and diplomatic solutions. But that shouldn't be, the Cape Gideon condition of where we are.
This idea of what is realistic and what is possible is such a tool that has been used on, I just would say, all of us, by every regime existing in this region, that says you have to only think within what feels realistic when all of us are living in an unrealistic reality. Nothing is realistic nothing is sustainable. Nothing, actually make sense about the way things are going and the way things are headed. And yet still so many of us are constrained by this idea of like what is realistic and not able to think about what we actually want, what people actually want, what they want for their children, what you want to see when you walk out of your door in the morning. And I think that's what's so important about our role when mobilizing anyone, but when mobilizing Palestinians and Jews, is to really get people to think like, what do you want? Not just how do you think you can get security, or how do you think you can get freedom, or whatever. If you feel safe, if you feel free, what does that look like and what do you want?
Yeah. And by the way, for many people that might hear that might say, oh, so we have to like dream big and just like, historic justice before peace. And we're like, no. That's not what we mean. What we mean is, what do people actually want right now? Why are Palestinians in Israel mobilized more around organized crime than about the occupation? Because that's their own occupation. That's their own version of occupation and blockade. And what do Jewish Israelis want? What do people in Gaza, in Beit Lahia right now, intense, want? What do people want? And open the political imagination of actually how our lives look like. And there is an urgency to that. That is much bigger than what people might perceive as what people want, the big things. No. What people want are actually very, very immediate, urgent things that are a function of time. And the longer we are discussing the big things of what you want in your fantasies, people are losing their lives and are suffering. And it's getting just worse by the minute.
And it doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean it's not important to have these big conversations.
Of course.
Because I think that these big ideas and conversations around justice should drive the ways in which like we think that we can achieve all these things that we want. But I think we need, to shift the conversation in what we actually want to see.
Yeah. So I guess there are 2 million Palestinians in Israel, part of Israeli society. And I invite everyone to keep that question. What do we want? As we are Palestinians, we are going, we have our wants and our needs and our urgent, demands as Palestinians, but also as part of Israeli society. Our duality is extremely important. So I'm happy we were able to dive into that, because I do think it gets us into a lot of new, what does it mean to organize Israeli society and Palestinian society within it? What does it mean? What is the Palestinian leadership within Israel means?
I think something that, listeners or people abroad also might not totally understand is Palestinian citizens, Palestinians in Israel are the only group that's related to this situation in general that speak both languages fluently, that speak Arabic fluently and Hebrew fluently, and have a deep understanding of both societies. And I think, number one, that's incredibly valuable and can be like a key to us kind of developing some sort of shared view of reality, shared language. And I think that in many ways, the Palestinian citizens understand Israeli society sometimes more than Jewish citizens understand Israeli society.
Absolutely. Are you kidding me? We have to. It's a survival kit. It comes, like we have to understand it. Not only understand it, we have to internalize it. We need to, we need to navigate it in order to survive economically, politically, legally, socially. We need to have it. You don't.
Yeah.
As a hegemon, you're just living your own hegemony. The Jewish people are living. I feel so bad when I say you. I don't mean you.
No, you can say me. It's okay.
You obviously you do challenge yourself because you choose to, part of the movement, right? Yeah, you choose to learn about our side and navigate it accordingly, right? You challenge yourself. Most people don't, when you're living with your own hegemony, you don't. Of course we know more.
And with that,
anyways, thank you for tuning in. See you next time.
This show is produced by Yoshi Fields and music is from Epidemic Sound. Please like and subscribe wherever you listen. And if you have a question for us, feel free to email us and we might even bring it into the show. Our email is podcast@standing-together.org. We've also put it in the show notes. We'd really love to hear from you. And if you'd like to support the podcast, feel free to donate to Standing Together. You can find the link in our show notes too.